Okay, well, we got some great answers on the survey. We will be putting this up after the session. Um, we really appreciate you guys being here and submitting that prior to Laurie's session today. And I just wanted to start off by saying good afternoon to everyone and welcome. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, we just wanted to share a little bit about the time schedule. For those of you who are new here and for those who have been here before, thank you for being here again. Um, these sessions will start at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then we will be, announcing our future sessions as well for everyone to be able to register for any future sessions. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the Illinois Pediatric Learning Collaborative is an education series that is offered through a partnership program between the HAP Foundation's Lynda P. Bollman program and SIU Medicine. Through these collaboratives, we provide free monthly education sessions. For anyone who is interested in pediatric hospice and palliative care, CEUs are available, so we will be posting a survey at the end of this session for those of you who are interested in CEUs. Unfortunately, we are not able to offer CMEs at this time. We highly encourage students to attend to expand their understanding of how this work is applied in their practice, and just to help them begin building their professional networks. And that is overall what we do. We're so glad to have you guys here today. Laurie, are we ready to start presenting? Great.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
awesome.
am.
I'm going to introduce Laurie a little bit. Today's session will be focusing on school services for children with medical complexities. We're very happy to welcome Laurie McDevitt, founder and director of Advocacy for the Special Ones in Your Life. She is a special education advocate and consultant with 3 decades of experience across many areas of special education. Her experience as a special education teacher, parent, case manager, clinic supervisor, inclusion facilitator, department lead, faculty member, and parent advocate gives her a valuable understanding of the IEP process from many different perspectives. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Angelina. I appreciate that very much. So, as Angelina said, I'm a teacher through and through, right? So even though I've had many jobs, so you'll see my hands moving. I like interaction. I like to know who my audience is. I like to call on people. It's just kind of in my nature of who I am. And I really do hope that, you guys have some takeaways today. First, thank you all for what you do because, you start many great practices with parents, and then I get to carry those on, as the students become school age. So thank you guys so much for what you do, and hopefully I will shed some insights as to, you know, fast forward and what happens later, when these kiddos get to be school age. So thank you, everybody. I do have the 3 objectives, and I'm just gonna, because I'm a teacher, that's what I do, right? I tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I tell you, and then I tell you again. But our 3 objectives, are, do you understand what the focus is on education? And what I really hope that the takeaway today is it's not just all academics, right? It's not the Pythagorean theorem. It's not the table of elements. It's not, how many degrees there are in a triangle. What education is it's the whole child, it's the whole body, and that's often what people miss, and that's where my heart is, and that's what the heart is for these kiddos, is to say, wait a second here, our focus really might not be the Pythagorean theorem, right? So that's objective number 1. The objective number 2 is, let's kind of look at what the 3 major options are, right? Like, let's take a look at what an IEP is. And in this world of special education, we use a lot of alphabet soup, right? So IEP is an individualized education plan. Then we have a 504 plan. We even throw numbers in there because there was an act out there that was called the 504 plan, which is like Americans with Disabilities Act. And then we also talk about homebound, which is very different from homeschooling. So, we want to just kind of distinguish these three different buckets, right, or these three different categories that the students can qualify for. And then objective number three is that we want to take a look at what is the heart of the child, what is the true desire of the parents and the family, and we want to try to figure out ways that we can align that with the schools, right? So I'm going to give you some examples with that and just say, hey, what's the end game here? And we want to try to get as close to that end game, as possible. So hopefully that makes sense. Scott, I think you're directing my slides. You can go ahead to the next slide if you want. I don't know what you see versus what I see, but my focus is really to shift and look more at what is school, and it's more than just academics. Like, sometimes people are like, I don't even know what to ask for, right? Like, I don't even know what's possible, right? But for a healthy child, it's just a natural long-term academic ladder, right? And along with that, they grow in skills. And what I oftentimes tell people is look at the school's mission statement, right? Like a mission statement of school goes far beyond a student will get straight A's, a student will attend every day, a student will um, go to the best Ivy League schools or whatever. It's far more than just an academic lane. When you really look at a school's mission statement, it really is to say, hey, what is the whole child, right? And so for the students that we all talk about today is we really need to look at and say, okay, what is our goal here, right? What will help make a kid, right? What can the school provide that is beyond the academics? And so we're going to look a little bit about like that lived life experience, that when a child does attend school, what is the goal of having them attend? And really trying to work with the school system, which isn't perfect. There's brokenness in a school system, and there's challenges within a school system, just like any of the other systems we have. And I'm sure the medical system is another great example where there's sometimes bumps in the road. And so it's really establishing partnerships and relationships with the people involved so that they can understand what is the emotional well-being of the child, what is the functional well-being of the child, and what's important, like what kind of peer socialization could we expect, as well as the academics. And so the thing that we have going for all of us is that there are legalized protections when it comes to these educational needs. And so helping a family really kind of narrow down what is it we're looking for from the school, right? What do we need? What do we want from a school? um, I think would be really beneficial. So as Scott is gonna like talk about the next slide, I really want us to like think about your own experiences. What is like a core memory that you have about school? And if you're comfortable, unmute, put it in the chat. And we're going to kind of make an analogy of, was it academic? Was it functional? Was it social? Was it relational? Like, what was it? So that we can kind of connect a little bit about what's already in our schema to, the schema of the children under our care. Um, so if anybody has, I'm going to give you like some think time, right? Because that's what I do as a teacher is we give everybody think time of what is a core memory from school. Anybody have one that they want to share?
I'll say this is the time of year, but just the excitement of like school supply shopping and getting to see your friends again. And, yeah, just kind of that whole routine and ritual.
Absolutely. The smell of a box of crayons, right? Or when you open up those watercolors and they're all perfect, like there is a certain excitement in that to be like, oh my gosh, right? Or even just filling that backpack and bringing it in, or the first time you get to put stuff in a locker, right? Like you've really, really nailed it, Dr. Miner. I see some people say, oh, playing Foursquare at recess. You know how many times I broke my glasses playing Foursquare at recess? Like, I just loved it, right? And there is the fresh smell of school supplies. I think that that was really good. Um, the history teacher that dresses up. Oh my gosh, I love it. There's energies that and an excitement that like you don't want to say it's such a teacher thing to do, right? But we have like our costumes and we have our get-ups and we have our way of connecting with the students. We want to make learning fun, I think fundamentally, as teachers. And I think that those are like such rich memories. So thank you for those of you who shared, outright. I'll share a couple, from my own. There was a time I taught second and third grade, and I literally put up this huge tent in my classroom. The book we were talking about was like, living in, a tent, right, as opposed to a house. And so I literally like, put up a tent in the classroom. And years and years and years later, I still have my students, oh, Miss McDevitt, I remember when you put up a tent in our classroom, and it was just like, okay, that's a great memory, right, to connect it to. And I think for me, one of my huge memories was graduating eighth grade, right? I was giving the speech for doing something good. I don't even know if it was grades or personality or something like that. And for just reasons based on my family, neither one of my parents came to my eighth grade graduation because of a series of events. And I remember I was really upset about that. And I had my eighth grade teacher and my counselor, um, Mrs. Dosey. She came up to me and she said, when you get nervous, look at me, and I will just be honored to stand in the gap. And I thought, oh my gosh, thank you. And so when they talked about parents, when they talked about, families, I was able to just zone in on her and she was there for me. And so that has very little to do with teacher training, right? Like we're not really taught, how to be compassionate. We're taught structure and pedagogy and how to communicate, objectives to students. And so there's a real human nature that I like to tell people that you want to tap into, right? As Angelina says, there's some things that are just innate in some people, not in all people. And so sometimes, you got to find those people. You got to find people within the schools that are your people, right? They're your people that will be there and understand and get it and connect. And sometimes you can win people over too, right? You can win people over, in my opinion, by being somewhat transparent, right? And making the connections yourself. So that's something else that we're going to talk about within these systems of a school is far more than academics. Now, I can also tell you like who taught me helping verbs, and I can tell you who taught me the periodic table of elements, but those aren't the things that um, well, I guess they are the things, right? It's like the history teacher who dressed up, right? It made history come to life, alive for you. And I think the same thing with the periodic table of elements. Some people are like, oh my gosh, how do you remember that? And well, because I had a really good teacher, right? Like I had somebody who I connected with. So I think that's what we want to also say is that these teachers want to see the whole child. They want to see the whole family. They want to see the siblings and the people who are impacted um, by the medical issues that are going on, right? And so, I always have hope. I always believe that there are good people, right? So we're going to continue. Thank you guys for sharing and for participating. For those of you who didn't, there's going to be more opportunities for you to do that. And if you're an introvert, that's absolutely okay as well. So, within the next slide, what we're almost going to talk about is like a hierarchy of needs, right? And the vertical that's going up and down here is really about relational and functional needs, right? And so we're really going to talk about that higher level need of what does the family need? If the family is drowning in like nursing schedules and administrative tasks, and there's insurance and there's stress, and there's just a whole bunch of just life stuff that happens when you have a complex medical need, we want the school to support them and not give them homework, right? We don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, if I ask the school to do something, they're going to like put it back on me and now I've got to do, even more stuff, right? And so we really want to kind of balance like what do you feel like the school's asking you to do? What are they actually asking you to do? And how can clinicians and the medical people and advocates, how can we all support these families as they try to partner with schools for whatever's in the best interest of these kiddos? And there's a certain amount of like medical stamina, right? Like we have to plan for like, do we need classroom nursing? Do we need pain control? Do we need oxygen? Is there suction? Are there nursing needs that need to be met throughout the day? What about fatigue? What about just fatigue of getting to school, let alone the stamina of being there throughout the whole day? And so we talk about that and say, well, what did they need? Did they need an afternoon schedule? Do they need a morning schedule? Do they need to show up for art, music, and PE, and at that point they're done? Or do they need academics? Like, let's really talk about what is their stamina, what is the complexity of what they need, and what is the wants of the family as well. The other thing we need to or could look at is that social emotional impact, right? Like, how do we make friends and keep friends? Like, I mean, that's another thing you can think of in your head is think of your friends from grade school, right? Think of your friends from high school. And do they bring you joy, or just even thinking of them, do you smile, right? And that's what we want for these kiddos as well, is we want to give them the opportunity to the greatest extent possible for connection. And we really need a team at school to talk about those connections and what could that look like and what do we want it to look like. And along with that, I'm gonna bring in, what about the siblings? What about the cousins? What about the neighbors? What about the friends? What about the parents' friends whose kids are impacted by complex medical needs? Like, there's a whole community here, and it's not just one person that's impacted by this. And so I look and say, okay, what are the social emotional needs of everybody who's connected, to this family? Because it can be really, really complex. I know Scott is asking, what is the socialization for medical complex children that are non or minimally verbal? Great question, right? How do we get that connection, right? How do we get a nonverbal communication going on, and how do we likewise, right? I'm flipping this a little bit. How do we also make the experience for the non-complex medical children comfortable as well? They're going to be curious. They want to ask questions. They don't know. They might be scared. They might have a lot of questions. And so oftentimes, as clinicians, I think y'all can sit down and say, what do you want this to look like? Yeah, your private medical information is private and you don't need to tell anybody what's going on. But kids are just naturally curious, right? Like, I remember like the sixth grade, and I asked the parent, like, what do you want the classroom to know? And they're like, I don't know. And I was like, well, think about it, because you can give a presentation to the class. We can buy books. We can integrate the medical condition into books, into the curriculum. Like, we can figure out ways to write letters to parents in the class and say, let's explain a little bit. So when your kids come home curious, let's explain a little bit about what's going on, right? And you can work with that, but it kind of has to be initiated by the parents, because the schools can't share your medical information with other families, right? So, like, there's this fine line between what do you want to be shared. And what we found with this sixth grader is, oh my gosh, once we kind of just put it out there and we said, okay, this is what's going on. We know you're curious. Ask your questions. Ask your questions. Because we want you to approach this child with love and compassion, and don't be afraid. And I'm getting a little teary-eyed here, because what happened was they they came around the child and the parents were like, I never knew. I didn't know that kids could be this kind, right? Because you think middle school, they can be rough, right? But the parent had to take that risk and say, okay, I want to go present to the class, and I want to write a letter to the parents, and I want to say, this is what's going on, and this is what we need, and this is what we don't need, right? And I just want this for my child. So I think um, I think that situations like that, like humanizes it for everybody. Same thing with, that I'm the sibling of the child with cancer. I'm the big brother, the little brother. That child has some social and emotional needs too. And let's just talk about it, right? Or you can choose not to talk about it, but you have the right to do either. And you can change from year to year, right? As to what you share with, the school. And functional and recreational, that's just about personal joy, right? Like, is there a club? Is there a recess? Is there a school milestone? Is there something that the medically fragile child, what do they want to do, right? Like, let's figure that out as well, right? And then what are they capable of? And then how do we accommodate? And how do we like even the playing field? And how do we bring the joy to them? And how do we make it happen so that their right to a joyful experience in school isn't thwarted because of all the medical stuff, right? But it takes like conversation, and it takes an advocate, and it takes clinicians in there saying and asking some questions and then figuring out what's possible. And I think too, Scott put in the question too, about, children affected by, childhood cancer. And I think having the platform to ask the questions and let the kids feel what they feel, and allow the other children to surround them, whether it be in the classroom or in these clubs or in the things that are important to them. They're going to find like-minded individuals, right? The like-minded individuals go to cooking club or chess club or running club or whatever they do. And having those connections with like-minded individuals, I think is really, really helpful to everybody. Um, and then lastly, oh, did we forget about academics? We forget about academics. That is probably pretty flexible. We can accommodate and adapt assignments. We can waive state tests. You can shorten the school day. It doesn't have to be the primary thing. You can modify, if there's a cognitive processing issue or cognitive issues on some days, you could postpone tests. There's so much you can do, right? And what you need is like a school psychologist or somebody, in the field to say, okay, tell me what you have medically going on, and we can figure out how to adapt, and we can figure out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. We can do pass fail. There are so many things you can do if academics isn't the main thing. On the other hand, I had a kid once, he wanted to take the eighth grade constitution test. Like, he was like, no, no, I've heard about this eighth grade constitution test for years, right? And so, like, he just knew, like, no, don't deny me of that opportunity. I was like, dude, you have at it. Like, just tell me what you need, right? And if we had to do the legislative branch first, judicial branch another day, and executive branch another day, we can do that. Like, we can accommodate, right? But the important thing to him was, I waited. I waited all this time. I want to take the test. I'm like, go ahead, take the test. Like, take the test. Like, I will be there to cheer you on, if that's in fact what you want to do, because that's the academic thing that you've just been striving, to do. So I think for me, if you can, understand, I really do want it to be about the whole child. I want it to be about the whole child for every child, right? As well. But really help and walk alongside these families, kind of figure out, make the main thing, when it comes to what are we looking for in the whole hierarchy of things. So I'm going to share a quick story, and then I had a student with a progressive, lifelong limiting condition, and the school's physical therapist. And again, if it's a medical issue that if impacts academics, it becomes a school issue. If it's a medical issue that impacts education, it becomes a school issue. So sometimes it's just medical, and sometimes it's both. And so the school, physical therapist, she thought the goal should be transferring, right? Like, you're transferring from a wheelchair to sitting. And that's really what she wanted to work on, was functional sitting transfers. And this kid was like, no, I want to walk across stage on graduation, and we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, is that possible? And we're like, well, let's figure it out. We talked to mom, the medical team, and the physical therapist. And they're like, yeah, we think it's possible. And that became the goal. Like that became the goal is wanting to walk, not be in a wheelchair, not to be pushed, but to walk across stage at graduation. That came from the student. It didn't come from the adults pushing this on them. And so that made the physical therapist the main goal, right? And we structured the therapy, we structured her schedule, we structured a lot around that main goal. And she did it. Like she walked across stage at graduation. And that's what, for me, school is all about, right? Like that's what brings us all joy. And we know it brought her joy. No doubt, no doubt in our mind. Like we were cheering on step 1 to step 5 to all the way across the stage, you know. But I want to encourage that we feel free to use the school's resources to make stuff like that happen, right? If that's what is truly important to the families. So Scott, you can go ahead and do the next slide. And then we're going to talk a little bit about like all the legal stuff. So we're going to take a little bit of pause with the human nature, piece of it all. Do you have any questions, or do you have another great story? Like if you have another great story of something that you think a kid wants that might be totally normal, totally not normal, totally, child specific, feel free to put that into the chat too, because not that there's anything normal, but you know what I mean? Like it could be a situation like that. Put that, feel free to put that into the chat. Love that. Eating lunch at the lunch table with friends, going through the hot lunch line. Like which kid wants to do that? But they're kids. Like make it real, make it what everybody else, make it accessible, just like everyone else, Um, I have worked, Angelina, with early childhood. Um, that's where I was for a while, and then I've done everything from um, preschool to college now. So, um, I've maybe you need to know a little bit about me. I've done it all. I've been in, residential facilities, and I've done everything from early childhood all the way. Now I teach at high school about how to incorporate early childhood interventions into the schools and how to really promote early interventions, for kiddos. So, um, okay, now we're going to kind of switch a little bit and talk about like, okay, what does the legal standard say? What is a free and appropriate public education? Those are like some key terms. We call that FAPE, but it stands for free. This should be free. Education should be free and appropriate, and it should be public education. And so that's kind of what the regulations say. And so that word appropriate is really important. The word free is really important. And so the federal law is totally on our side, right? The federal law says that we have this umbrella that we call the Americans with Disability Education Act. We have it was Americans with Disabilities Act. So that can take you all the way until your entire lifetime, right? If you are an American with the Disabilities Act. And then we also have like 504 plans that are in schools. And we also have IEPs, which are individualized education plans, which are in schools. And then we also have homebound education, which can be home or hospital. But it should be free and appropriate public education. And so I think, in our heads, sometimes we think school's from 8 to 4. Sometimes it's 9 to 3. Sometimes it's 7:30 to 4:30. But sometime in that realm is when kids go to school. But it doesn't have to be if that doesn't work for a medically fragile child, right? Like if the stamina isn't there, we can adjust because it's not appropriate for a child with chemotherapy to do both in the same day, perhaps, right? And so we need to figure out how does this work and what is appropriate, for each individual child. And I think that's the other key word is what is individual and what is appropriate, because what is appropriate for one child with cancer might not be appropriate for the next child with cancer. So we don't want to just say, well, this is what we do with our children who have X, right? Because that's just, It's maybe what you did once with a child that had X, but it doesn't, let me introduce you to my individualized child, right? And so feel free to, remind schools or school personnel when they feel like they have a one size fits all, that we understand that that really worked for that family, and we're really happy that worked for that family, but it doesn't work for our family because we go to afternoon, medical appointments instead of morning or whatever the situation is. So kind of keep it in mind that there can be a lot of flexibility, right? Or there should be a lot of flexibility. And sometimes it takes just reminding, the powers that be that it should be individualized. It should be appropriate for that particular, family. And the same thing too is there could also be like, I was going to say, don't allow them to put like any child into a box, right? That just because they may get A's and B's in reading and math doesn't mean that you could expect them to get A's in writing, because writing is a totally different motor task, right? And so feel free to give permission to eliminate some aspects of the curriculum that are going to be painfully difficult for a child, right? Like we don't have to do it all because there's medical needs that, but sometimes you might have to remember, because in our heads as teachers, we do reading and writing in the same block. We do reading and writing together, right? But writing might be really hard, or like Scott said, there could be a communication deficit. And so especially, I'm pro, let's get a communication device. We need to figure out how to get the student communicating. Is it sign language? Is it gestures? Is it verbal? Is it nonverbal? Like, let's figure out a way. And oftentimes it's an augmentative communication device, and figure out a way that becomes normalized, right, within the setting. And I think, Scott, you brought up a great point to say, okay, if you have a nonverbal child and you have a communication device that sometimes it looks like an iPad, or it might look like a, a typewriter, a computer, or some sort of device. I'm using my hands here. But that also needs to be not scary for everyone else. Everyone else around them needs to understand what that's all about, right? So that we can communicate. That if I have a device and I want to communicate with Angelina, she needs to know how to use my device to communicate back. Like this needs to be a two-way street. So I think that is, something else, just to kind of be thinking about here, and just really taking a look at um, what is like the educational impact of any of these, medical conditions. And same thing with like communication, like what is the educational impact of a nonverbal child, or a child with a medical condition, right? And if it's impacting their education, which could be functional, it could be social, it could be academic, then we need to figure out a plan, for that particular child. Um, and so somebody else is saying that they've worked with children with durable medical equipment, and parents are aware their child has cognitive disabilities. They're often focused on social interactions, therapies, PT, speech assistance, getting eye gaze therapy treatment, help acquire medical equipment, and more. Do you have advice for practitioners working with these families? Absolutely. Like, be in it with them, right? So all of what you said is absolutely within the school setting. To have the schools partner with you on, right? And the question that comes in is, if there's a cognitive disability, oftentimes the question is like, where should those children be educated, right? And that's a team decision, right? To figure out, do we educate within a general education environment and we accommodate? What happens when we bring that, eye gaze equipment into the general ed experience? It depends on what your goals are, right? If your goals are social emotional, if your goals are functional, and we're not grading this kid on whether it's something that's outside of the realm of what he's medically capable of doing, then that's what you look at, right? There are some schools that say, no, if you've got a cognitive disability, we have a program for you. And they put you into a classroom with other students with cognitive disabilities. But that's a conversation and a decision for the team that includes the parents, and it could include the medical personnel, and it could include the clinicians to help make those, decisions. And so I think the question, and Scott, you can go on to the next slide because it's going to connect to this, is where, right? Sometimes it may be absolutely appropriate for that child to be in a smaller classroom because that's the decision of the team, is that's far more appropriate than a classroom of 20. Another decision could be made that it's far more appropriate to be in a classroom of 20 than a classroom of 6. But you have to talk about that individual nature of that individual child. And they have a right to what's called the least restrictive environment, right? And when it comes to goals, which we're going to talk about in just a minute here, it depends on what their goals are. Like I had a family whose child had a cognitive disability. And the school for a while really wanted to put him in a separate classroom with other cognitively disabled children. And for some families, that works great and it is individualized and it is appropriate. For this particular family, the parents said this is not appropriate. He is child of X number. All of his siblings had these teachers. He wants this experience. He wants this other lane of experience. He wants teacher X, Y, and Z. And that's because all of his siblings did. And we have a whole legacy here. And he doesn't want to be moved to a whole nother school for this individualized, the smaller classroom with cognitively disabled children. And so we argued with the school district and we said, do you see what the parents are asking for? And they said, yeah, but we don't think cognitively he can meet the state standards. And we're like, we know cognitively he can't meet the same standard. We got medical doctors saying he can't. We've got parents agreeing with it. So let's remove that and let's put the goal that he's social and he's functional and he can do the things and get along, because that's what's important to the parents. The parents were less concerned about the academic state standards and far more concerned about his social and emotional well-being, right? And so that then became the goal. So and you might need an educational advocate. You might need clinicians to be in these meetings to make some of this stuff happen. But it's possible. I mean, that's what I do all day long is we look and say, okay, like what's happening here and how can we make sure that it's appropriate for the child? And so they said, but the state standards, and the parents are like, I will sign whatever you need me to sign, that we're not going to write goals about him reaching certain milestones because there's a cognitive disability and we have a medical diagnosis to say this is what it is, but he still kept social interactions and he still went to occupational therapy and he still went to speech and language therapy. And he still learned to socialize with his friends, but that's what became the goal, right? We make the main thing the main thing. And we also had a student with, the eye gaze therapy as well. And there was an argument, right? Because I think the well-meaning parent or teachers feel like it's better if a student with eye gaze therapy is in a different environment. And if that's what the parents want and it works and it's appropriate for that child, then they have a right to that. But when it's not appropriate for whatever reason and another choice needs to be made, then that's how we individualize it. And I think that, I know you might be looking for some concrete, but this isn't concrete. If you have an individualized education plan, it's individualized, right? And it's not an individualized academic plan. It's an education plan, right? So you got to figure out what's important when it comes to the, education of a child. So I'm going to talk to you about those 3 buckets. We talked about that overarching Americans with Disabilities. Then we have that Section 504 plan. A Section 504 plan, it focuses on the environmental changes that can be made, medical accommodations that can be made. It's best when it's specialized, when it's direct, when specialized instruction is not required. But you need some structured support in place. So you make a plan and you say, for this season of life, this is what we need for the child, because a major life activity is impacted. It can be thinking, it can be walking, it can be breathing, it can be mobility. And then there's this wonderful line that says other, and you can write anything you want. And so that's where I tell parents, like, if they just need like accommodations for a season, because for this season they're getting these medical treatments, then you make a 504 plan. You say there's a disability, it's impacting them, it's temporary or not, temporary, and it's impacting one of these major life decisions, but he doesn't require specialized instruction. He doesn't need a special ed teacher to teach differently or have him access the curriculum differently. He just needs some accommodations, and it could be accommodations in scheduling. It could be accommodations in timing. It could be accommodations in the output of what work needs to be done. But this is a wonderful tool to make a plan for something that interrupts the life activity. And it can be thinking, concentrating, reading, remembering, learning, or other. And I love that one. The other bucket is very different, not very different. It's different, substantially different. It's an individualized education plan. This is for the children who need specialized instruction. They have there's 13 different categories in Illinois, right? They have a category that qualifies them, that they have a disability, and it is creating an adverse effect on their education. Have a disability, and it has an adverse effect on their education. There's a disability. It's called other health impairment. Wonderful. So you have a disability, it's a health impairment, and it has an adverse impact on your education, not academics, but education. And then you qualify for an IEP, individualized education plan. And this is more of a legalized document. It is pages long. 504 plan, 4 pages. IEP, I'm going to say on average, 36 pages. I've read 100 pages of an IEP, right? It is a document that legally spells out a plan, individualized for this child. It might include nursing, it might include OT, PT, speech, social work, whatever is needed for this child, but it's individualized and it's a plan. It includes goals. With those goals comes specialized instruction. So that's the major difference. An IEP is you're tied to a team that specializes in special education, and you've got an entire team. These parents walk in the room and their eyes are really big and they're like, wow, okay, there's a lot of people in this room, right? And there could be 12 to 20 people in the room, right? Because that becomes a team that surrounds this kiddo, and you measure goals and you have goals, and you then talk about placement and what does this look like? Where's the best place for this student to get social work services? Should it be in a group? Should it be individualized? What about speech? What about PT? What about OT? What about nursing services? What about academics? Should they be pulled out? Should they be pushed? Should a teacher go into the classroom? Should they have an aide? Should it be an academic aide? Should it be a functional aide? There's so many decisions. That's why these IEPs can be 36 to 100 pages long, right? There's a lot of decisions that go into this, and then you have a whole team making those decisions. And so an IEP is also, it has more bite legally than a 504 plan. It has more timelines, more accountability, more regulations, and then there's more plans if there's a dispute having to do with it. There's more avenues for a dispute if there's any disputes. So hopefully that is crystal clear with everybody here. And there's a question in the chat that says, would I encourage a 504 for changes to schedules, attendance, accommodations for children affected by childhood cancer that may only be able to attend half days, 3 days? Yeah, absolutely. You could do a 504 plan that says, okay, this is what it's going to look like when the child is at school. And when the child is at school, these are the accommodations, which kind of evens the playing field. Maybe some children might be reading the book, but an accommodation might be somebody else listens to it, right? Because for whatever reason. So there's an accommodation. Um, a modification is an actual change, right? That it's a change. It's a change with output or input. So a modification might be, you know what? So everyone else is tested on all of the table of elements, and this kiddo, he's going to be tested on just 8 of them. That's a modification. We're modifying the test for this student, right? And we're going to individualize it. We're going to write it down and say, hey, this is what's going to be modified or changed. An accommodation is, oh, we're going to give him a calculator for the test. He's taking the exact same test as everyone else, but we're just going to accommodate this one to give a calculator. And so, and it's pretty complex. Like, I don't want to like simplify it, but it's a complex document, but you've got a lot of people working on that document to say, what does the child need? So to Scott's question, you could have a child with cancer with an IEP because he has a health condition that adversely impacts education, and maybe they need some specialized instruction. Even if it's executive functioning, instruction, it's still instruction. You could have a 504 plan. You usually don't have both. Sometimes schools insist on both because one is temporary, and then when this one goes away, you have an IEP. And then if you need to bring in some more temporary, in and outside of, let's say, chemotherapy or something like that, you might have a 504 and an IEP. And then when they're no longer in chemotherapy, then the 504 goes away. The other one, which is interesting, so we have bucket number 1, 504, bucket number 2 is an IEP. The third bucket is homebound. Homebound instruction is for any medical condition that is going to keep the kid out of school for longer than 2 weeks. And they need a medical professional to say the student has a medical condition and we need homebound for 2 weeks or longer. And usually there's an end date, or the parents will ask, or the school team will ask for an end date. And it could, best guess 3 months, and if it's sooner, it's okay. They're not going to hold you to it or make the kid not go to school for 3 months, But at that point, the school sends a tutor to the greatest extent possible to the home and does homebound tutoring. And it can be 5 to 10 hours a week. So let's do the math on that one, right? Schools are usually 5 to 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's like 30 hours. And they're only going to send somebody to your house 5 or 10 hours a week. It's individualized. It's one-on-one. And it's up to the medical professionals what they're doing and what they're not doing. So it could be, more art type things, and that's okay. Maybe the cognitive demand needs to be less, and maybe we're not doing math. Maybe the student really enjoys reading, and maybe we are doing reading with accommodations, but they're going to send somebody to the house to do homebound tutoring. There's also stipulations in there that they can send them to the hospital to do homebound tutoring. And oftentimes hospitals have wonderful partnerships with schools, and there's usually a home, or there has been a hospital school coordinator who helps, kind of manage that. If not, there's somebody from the school who can help manage that. But it's what the medical professionals say, can happen to the greatest, extent possible with stamina and fatigue and desire and ability, So I think there are 3 different options in general for 3 different things, right? So, and there are times when the homebound is temporary, and then maybe it goes into a 504 plan once they're, back at school more, or maybe they always had an IEP and just temporarily they were on homebound, and that's okay too. So there's some fluidity in, which plan or which bucket you're using at the time. And there might be some people who are like, I don't want them to come to my house. I would rather them meet at, physical therapist office, or I'd rather they meet at the hospital, or we meet at the library, and that's okay too. Like there's not hard, fast rules about this. I think what I really want you guys to hear is parents have rights. They have rights when it comes to their own child, right? And they can advocate for the rights or advocate and say, I know we have a right to this, but this doesn't work for us right now. And that's okay too. So I wish I could say there's a one size fits all, but what I love to say is there's not a one size fits all, right? Is I know people who are very linear thinking are like, oh my gosh, Laurie, you can confuse me. But I'm like, no, but that's the joy of this. This is the wonderfulness of this, right? Is that I'm not telling you there's a one size fits all. I'm telling you that it can be multiple sizes for multiple kids and it can be really truly individualized. And it can be as rich and rewarding and as wonderful as we need it to be, right? So I think I want to say, like, don't be afraid to ask, don't be afraid to ask what the parents, really need. Um, and then Scott's also saying, can a child receive therapies in the home as part of their homebound instruction? Yes, they can. The school would be responsible to send the OT therapist to the home if there was a documented disability, an adverse impact on education, and it was already written into an IEP. Then, yes, they would send the related service providers, because it's related to that medical condition, to the house. Now, the team could meet and say, maybe it works better for the social worker. Maybe let's just say hypothetically, they were in a social work group of 4 kids. Well, now a decision needs to be made. Do we Zoom or do Google Meets or do some sort of virtual thing and include that student during Tuesday at 10 o'clock? Because that's what we always do. And does that work? Nope. Kids in a medical appointment at Tuesday at 2 o'clock or 10 o'clock. So that might not work, right? So at that point, a team needs to meet and say, okay, we know we're responsible for related services. But because they're homebound, what's that going to look like, right? And so then decisions will have to be made. What if that same social worker, logs on with the student remotely? What if the same social worker does come to the house? What if that social worker's not available after school? Then maybe there's a new social worker. So these decisions would need to be made, but they're still responsible for free and appropriate public education, even if they're on homebound. So whatever related services like speech and language, OT, PT, nursing, social work, they would still be responsible. But also sometimes one-on-one is different than group. So like there's got to be and some kids, they don't want one-on-one for an hour. That's like a lot, right? And so, but they're like, no, but I would take group for an hour because group's fun and it's engaging and, on and on, or half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is, Um, and so hopefully, that kind of makes sense. But yes, they're still responsible for the free and appropriate public education under, an IEP, whether they're homebound or not. And then the other question that's out there, and I love that you guys are asking questions, is what would you encourage clinicians to advocate for families if the school states that they do not have an OT available for homebound services, even if the child needs this services? Then I would say that's like a complaint, right? Like and I'm not go file a complaint, go file a complaint, go file a complaint with the state. Like I am not an advocate of that, but they have a responsibility. Sometimes what I usually say is you meet with the director, whoever the decision maker is, and say, okay, what's the problem? And they may legitimately say, we don't even have enough OTs to cover our school day. And now we need an OT for homebound. And we're like, yeah, you do, right? Because you do. And so sometimes they need to contract with an outside provider to provide the services, but the school is still responsible for those services, right? But they just can't say we're not doing it. I mean, they can say it because I'm sure it happens all the time, which is why I have a job, right? And I advocate. But we need to problem solve. We need to figure out another way. Or we say, is the other choice during the school day or is it after school? Like you got to figure out a way. But I would encourage the clinicians to, my rule of thumb is you go to the person first, right? Like, can we talk for 20 minutes, right? Like I like to go to the decision maker before I just stir up everything, right? There's also something called PWN, prior written notice, and you say, I hear that you're denying my child OT services for homebound. Could you give me prior written notice as to why? And those are like just buzzwords. Can you give me a PWN, prior written notice as to why? And it's just a really calm way to say, we have been in many conversations and I don't quite understand why this isn't happening. So let's put it in writing so that we have it. And they're required to do that if you have, an IEP or you have those minutes on your IEP. And that's kind of a buzzword to, oh, suddenly we found somebody, and I'm not saying that that's what happens, but suddenly they're like, okay, they're serious now if they need me to put the reasons in writing, right? And you say, yeah, because you can then take that prior written notice and have a complaint about it, right? It's a legal document that they're not following. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So I just kind of lost everybody's video. I don't know if that's me or you, but I liked to see faces. But I'll kind of keep going. Scott, if you want to go to the next one, it kind of goes to your question about 504 plans. Thank you. The plan of a 504 plan is to kind of build a bridge over type of, barriers. An example is if the child has cancer and he's undergoing, active treatment, there might be a stamina issue, right? There might be a brain fog issue, and they don't really need a special education teacher. They just need somebody to level this playing field. And that's kind of what that job of the 504 plan is. They don't need multimodality instruction, or they don't need specialized research-based intervention instruction to fix it. They just need to level the playing field during this season. And a 504 plan can, accommodate that. You can write that the student gets, 50%, more time, that they can leave early, that they can have a reduced schedule, a lot of what the question was early. It's really flexible, right? It can be temporary. It can just be kind of for a season. But you can usually start that with a 504 plan with the school nurse, or some sort of 504 plan coordinator, usually the principal, the assistant principal, at the school. And that's the Americans with Disabilities Act is kind of what that covers. And then Scott, you can go ahead and share the next slide. But homebound medical is not homeschooling. The responsibility is not on the families. Homeschooling is a buzzword that if you say, forget it, I am homeschooling my child, at least in the state of Illinois, they say, good, God bless you, there you go. They wash their hands, they're done, because a homeschool is considered a private school. And you have just informed them that you are enrolling your child in a private school and not in their public school. And so then they don't have responsibility anymore. So I usually tell parents, and I understand, a frustration of, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it myself. I get it. I totally understand that. But when you use the words, I will then homeschool, you're making a commitment that you're going to enroll your child in the private school of my home, right? And then the school doesn't have that responsibility anymore. So usually what I say is, hey, if it's a medical condition, why don't we call it homebound for a while and get a note from a doctor that says these are the conditions or the limitations, and they can still access it. And I love that there's virtual now, right? I love that there's online now. There's so much ways that they could possibly, access it. Sometimes though, screens don't help for these kids. And that's okay too. You can say, we need homebound, but we don't need screens. Okay, that's an option too, because remember, we need to individualize this, as, much as possible here. So I know I've been talking a lot, and I would love for, you guys to just do a quick check-in with me. It's not even a quiz. I'm just going to say, I use the word IEP a lot. I've used the word 504 a lot. Who can tell me what an IEP even stands for? And go ahead and put that into the chat if you can remember what an IEP even stands for. 3 little words that are oh so important. And then we're going to talk about that I don't even think I put it on this slide, Scott, if you move the next slide about an IEP. Thank you for Allison, and thank you, Dr. Miner. That's the individualized education plan. The key words there are individualized and education. It is not an academic plan, right? So I like to just remove the blinders on parents that just, or school districts who just seem to think, but academically my child, blah. And it's like, no, this is a whole education plan, right? We talked about all those joys in the beginning of, Foursquare and eating lunch and recess and school supplies and all of the things that have nothing to do with academics, right? And we need a plan for all of that. We need a plan for the richness. We need a plan for the field trips. We need a plan for the joys of a field day. And we need a plan that is not burdening a family or a child that already is carrying enough burdens, right? So thank you for those who are participating in the individualized education plan quiz. But this truly means that you need some specialized instruction, right? That we need multimodality instruction because that's the condition, right? Maybe it could have an other health impairment, but they could also have, I think, the top 5 eligibilities that I deal with might be autism, other health impairment, speech and language disorder, specific learning disability. Yeah, those are probably the main out of all 13. There's visual impairment, there's blind and deaf and orthopedically, multi-disabilities. That's another one that impacts the medical community a lot, is sometimes if there's too many health conditions, they might just say, hey, they have multiple disabilities, and that's okay too. So it is really written. You start this written. Nothing happens in this world of IEPs and free and appropriate public education if you don't start. Thank you, Megan. If you don't start with a written request. I would like my child evaluated to see if they qualify for an IEP. It can be one statement sent to the principal, right? And then do not expect anything magical to happen. They have 10 days to respond, then they have 10 days to schedule a meeting. They have another 10 days, and now it's been 30 days, and you're like, oh my gosh, this process is so slow. Yes, the process is what it is, right? You could say, I would like an expedited IEP, right? And they might, shorten things, but by law and legally, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the federal one, has given laws, right? And they say, okay, we've decided we are going to evaluate this child. Yay! And the school has 60 school days to do it. You're like, 60 school days, that's 3 months. Yep. 20 school days in a month, that's 3 months, so it's a process. What you can encourage any family to do is start early. Start early, because it's a process. Nothing is going to happen overnight. And the timelines, are regulated, right? And it is what it is. And so I think it's the next slide. The number one thing I can think of to tell you as well is, so the next slide should say the domain meeting, this is like the number one, in my opinion, important meeting if you're going to evaluate for an IEP. But parents are like, yeah, let's just get on with it. Yeah. Well, we can have this without you. And parents are like, yeah, just give me what to sign. And I'm like, no, stop the presses. Don't just agree to have your child evaluated and you don't even know what they're evaluating, right? You need to give informed consent. So the analogy I would say is sometimes, and I'm not saying this ever happens in your medical facility, but sometimes, it's kind of like a patient coming in with a broken bone and they're going to run cholesterol tests. Okay, there might be reasons for that, but they came in with a broken bone. Maybe we should do radiology. I don't know, maybe, but sometimes they miss the mark, right? Maybe they have well-meaning behind it, but what they evaluate, might be equivalent to, a panel that you might run for testing, right? In a medical field, right? Like what panel of blood work are we going to do? Or what are we going to look for when we draw blood? It's very similar of an analogy in school is we look and say, okay, what are we going to test for? What are we going to look at? And that is so, so important. But that meeting isn't required. And they might just say, hey, parents, we just need your signature. But we really need to evaluate the right things. And this is where I'm like, man, invite your whole team to this meeting, right? Invite the clinicians and let somebody speak about motor planning and let them speak about the social emotional impact and let them speak about language and pragmatic language and articulation and feeding. And let's talk about mobility and let's talk about, eye gaze and what are we using for communication. And let's just talk about the whole kit and caboodle right here. And let's talk about brain fog and let's talk about fatigue and stamina and academics. And this is like where you want everyone at the meeting to say, what do we know about this child? What do we need to find out about this child? And then who's going to do the testing about this child? And so the more we can bring to the table or bring letters or reports and say, this is what we need. So let's not recreate the wheel on the stuff we already know. But it's super important because if the parents aren't coming, with enough, then the team, I'm not saying it's intentional, they might not run the right battery of tests. And 60 days later, we're going to look at each other and be like, how come we didn't test for this? And we're like, because nobody brought it up. And so, what I say is how do you support parents? Attend these meetings, attend the domain meeting, attend the um, educational assessment meeting, right? Deciding what assessments are going to be done. So that 60 days later, we're like, yay, we have the data we need. Yay, we can qualify or not qualify. Yay, we have baseline. Now we can build a plan because to build a plan when you don't have all the data and all the assessments is really super hard, right? So I, usually say, I believe it is the single most important meeting in all of this is to really say what domains, what areas do we really have to look at? Are we looking at vision? Are we looking at hearing? Are we looking at stamina, fatigue, health, communication, social, emotional, physical, speech and language, how academic and cognitive, how are they processing stuff? And
Lori, I have a
so,
question for you.
yes,
So this is really interesting, right? Because we have a lot of kids that have were born with a diagnosis that is complex and chronic, right? And
yes,
or they transition from early intervention to school district at 3 years old, right? That starts at 2.5, right?
yep,
So
yep.
so Ian makes a great point, and I would love your input on this because at a lot of those meetings we have early intervention there. We have social workers there, nurses that are part of their hospice and palliative care team. However, what Ian said in the chat is that she finds the kiddos progress or tank and lose the school support due to complexities. And so that happens also at that transition, right? You're going from several hours in early intervention to a couple minutes, it feels like at 3. And so her experience through the comment is parents no longer want to stay with the school because of that fighting, and she finds it to be a missed opportunity to uplift or support. Do you have, for those parents that are frustrated because they're not getting that the school doesn't necessarily understand the complexity of their child's medical condition, or
Mhm,
they don't feel they're doing a good enough job providing privacy for suctioning or get them out of the wheelchair because they only have stamina for 3 hours, yet they're trying to stay for 5, right?
mhm,
What
mhm.
do you have anything that you can encourage the clinicians on the call to do for those experiences when parents just want to give up and go to either to homebound or no schooling
Yep.
because they're frustrated with that process?
Yep, I hear it. And thank you for that question. What it literally, what you just described is a legal regulation. You are literally going from part B, I'm sorry, from part C to part B in the regulations because B in the world of schooling came first, right? From ages, it used to be, 3 to 23, that came first, and then came early intervention. Like that was the afterthought of, oh, early intervention is a really good thing, right? We need to do that. And so you literally are kind of going from one set of regulations to the next set of regulations. And what I would say is stick with it, because you're literally switching like teams, right? Just like in the medical field, if you're switching medical teams, you got to give it some time to catch up. And that's where, like, hire an advocate, get somebody in there that right off the get-go, you're like, wait, nursing needs, wait, medical needs, like this has to take priority. And it's not, let's wait and see, because that's not a good strategy for these kiddos. It's no, we can tell you, we've got 3 years of documentation. We can share with you whatever you need. Make sure you've got the nurses that are specialized in special ed in the meetings, because you've got school nurses who take care of the bloody noses and the skin knees, and then you've got the nurses who do this day in and day out for kids with special needs and medically fragile kids, and the diabetics and all of that. But they're the ones who are dealing with that all the time. And I am so sorry that that happens. Like, it breaks my heart whenever I have a parent just saying, I'm done. I'm so done, and I'm so frustrated, because I hear it. And so get the right people and be advocates, right? As clinicians, let's be advocates. Call an advocate, get somebody in there to do exactly that, to say, wait, the child hasn't changed, the needs haven't changed just because his age changed, right? And you've switched systems now in the regulations of things. So I would probably say, and I'm reading that kiddos progress or tank or lose the school support due to complexity. Sometimes it's education too, right? And what I do, I meet with the special ed director, right? And I have a 20-minute conversation with that person and say, can I pre-explain this to you before we get into this meeting as to what we are going to ask for? And I need you to meet with these parents. And oftentimes I'll be with the parents to say, my kid just came from, a hospital stay that was this long, and he's got this many people. Be prepared, because it's coming, right? And so I usually like to do that. I go to the person and say, I don't want to ambush you in the meeting, but these are the medical needs that are coming. Can you be prepared, right? And so at that 2.5 year of age, start these conversations to say, be prepared, we're coming. And hopefully, thank you, Dr. Miner. So hopefully that is, encouraging, that it does get better. But I also think, in my opinion, having those one-on-one conversations with the decision makers, with the administration, with the people who can make a difference, because sometimes the team at the school, they literally have no authority. They don't know that. What do you mean we need to hire a nurse? No, you need to hire a nurse. You need to hire a full-time nurse with this kid. And they're like, we can't do that. Yes, you can. Like, but you can't, but 2 or 3 administrators higher than your school team can. And so sometimes what it is getting the right people in those meetings, and I don't want to minimize it, but you need the right decision maker in those meetings. Otherwise, the answer might just always be no. And I don't want to simplify it that much, but does that make sense to you? And does it make sense to Aiden, who asked the question, or Yudin, I can't see who asked the question, but does that make sense, Scott? You asked the question. There you are. So to me, it's really important. I usually look at who is on the notice of conference and who's going to be in these meetings, and really make sure you've got the right people in the meetings and, the decision makers in the meeting. And I have no problem asking for the district nurse to be in your meeting. Parents have a right to ask for the most knowledgeable medical professional the school has to be in your meeting, right? And so don't be afraid to ask. And sometimes they don't know because nobody told them, right? And so there's usually always a special ed director. There's usually always a special ed, person. And, I've sat in meetings with early interventions, the clinicians and the parents and the doctors, and, made really, really good team decisions as well. But I have sat in meetings where we're all, I understand what you're saying. Any
Lori,
other questions
I'm sorry about my
about that?
internet. I'm so sorry. I have a question about a lot of families are looking to get into the specialized programs inside of their districts. So Siddell up in Lake County is an example of it, right?
Mhm,
Amazing program.
mhm,
But their families have experienced a little hesitation or there's not any openings in those schools.
mhm.
What would you encourage the clinicians to do if the child may need that level of care or that focus of education,
Yeah,
but they're seeing resistance in order to get that out of school placement?
right. Um, it, perseverance, right? There's a part of perseverance and talking about what is the appropriate placement for that child. There are other what they call therapeutic day schools is a term Illinois uses, but other states don't use that term. It's a non-public school. Some of them specialize in multiple needs children, medically fragile child. They can get on a wait list. They can look for, openings at different grade levels, depending. Talk. And I think again, it's getting the people in the room to say if the end goal is you want to be in CEDAL, and you want to be in this grade level or at this grade level, it's talking, that through. And I don't know what the resistance is, right? I think there are co-ops that become or they're public, right? And so I don't know what the issues are. Do you know any offhand as to why they say, is it full? Is it capacity? Is it because sometimes it's a blessing. You don't want to be in a school and they don't have the staff to keep everyone safe, right? I mean, and sometimes you don't know that until you poke and ask questions and you find out that the lead nurse is on maternity or something happened and you're like, oh, okay, there might be, solid reasons why. But there are things as wait lists, there are things as, keep asking for the therapeutic day schools or schools with medical staff. I think that's super important. We've had some where um, the nurses are employed by the district. And then there's some that I've seen that insurance covers, and there's this win-win, to say, hey, how can we make this work for the sake of the child? And you come up with creative solutions. You can always go to mediation with the school district, which is very personable. You can always have a resolution meeting with them and just talk it through and say, how do we resolve this? So I think to me is um, first let it be known that we believe that that's the more appropriate placement because of X, Y, and Z, because of safety, because of, trained school personnel, because of maybe like-mindedness with peers, um, and so whatever the reason is, and then figure out a path, towards that. And I hate to say, but there are people that do my job, all around. You tap into, helping people speak the language as well at these schools. But oftentimes it's getting to the right decision maker. That's super important. Any other questions? Because these are really good, and I know we're wrapping up here.
Dr. Ledbetter asked in the chat, how early should families start thinking and planning for an academic setting?
Yeah.
And then the second question to that is how early can the conversation with the school district start?
Yeah. You know, d- it's never too early. That's probably my question, right? And I think always trying to be on somebody's radar to say, hey, I've got this medically fragile child, they're coming. And whether it's using the preschool program or waiting until their kindergarten, a lot of that is parental choice, right? And so it's going to be an individualized decision as to say, but I don't ever think it's a good idea to spring staffing complexities on a school, right? If they need to staff with a nurse or medical personnel, they need to hire that person. They don't just have nurses hanging out. So, like, keeping in mind that these are human beings in the school, trying the best they can, but give them the heads up as soon as possible, right? To say, hey, we bought a house. Here's our lease, or here's our deed, here's our mortgage. We're staying, we're not going anywhere. My child will be coming to your district, let's start the partnership, And I've got parents, kind of just staying on the radar and being part of the school and being part of the community to the greatest extent possible, and then, but and again, it's maybe talking to the district's nurse, the main district nurse, the head nurse of the district, because they're going to be far more proactive than talking to the principal who might change next year, right? And the principals aren't always the best when it comes to this. They're great people, don't get me wrong, but they didn't go to school for this. It's the special ed directors that did, and the nurses that did, and the special ed and the case managers and all of that who went to school um, because we love these children, right? And the principal went for the administrative. Let me be an admin of all of this. So I think for me, it's never too early, and it's really giving them the heads up to say, hey, this is coming down the pike in 6 months. My kid is, 2.5, and I'm going to utilize the when he turns 3, he's coming to your district. Um, does that make sense? And does that kind of help? But the other thing too is don't be afraid to ask for what you need. But the system is set up to work. The regulations are in place to work. Is it a broken system? Yeah. You guys said that in your examples, it's a broken system sometimes. But when it works really well, right? And so I think for me, I want to advocate to say, if we can't fix what's broken, then let's figure out a bridge around it, right? To still get to the same place. And that's kind of where my heart is for this. So I'm coming to the end of my slide. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I just want to be, it can be as bureaucratic as, a next system, and it is not perfect, right? But I really do believe that there are good people in these broken systems. And if they are still there, they're there for a reason. And they really do want to say, they do want to help, right? But you gotta figure out. If they work perfectly, I wouldn't have a job, right? Like I advocate for students with special needs. Like that's just kind of what I do. But my last 2 slides just kind of say that, Scott, it just says, yeah, it's a bureaucracy, and work together. And I know working in a bureaucratic system is really, really hard, on top of everything else. But find an advocate, find a clinician who will go to bat for you, um, and I do think that, there are, rights that parents have, but I also understand when parents are like, it's not worth the fight, but it doesn't always have to be a fight. So I want to thank everybody. I think that, yeah, I think that this, yes, I think the system is designed to work. If that helps. And there are those of us in it fighting the good fight because we believe it. But if anybody ever has any questions, I mean, please just call me. Like if you just say, hey, I listened to you on this collaborative, I am more than happy to answer any questions and just help to the greatest extent possible. Or for me, somebody else said, do you help everybody who calls you? And I say, if I can't help them, I usually find somebody who can, right? And that's my whole thing is let me just connect you to a similar story or a similar, situation. So hopefully that helped. I'm kind of curious to hear the, poll at the end. But thank you guys so much, and thanks for coming back and letting me see your face.
We couldn't be happier, Laurie. This was absolutely dynamite. We're so appreciative of all the information you provided. It's a significant issue for a lot of the clinicians and for the inpatient to know more about the academic setting, for those in outpatient to be able to be better advocates. It was unbelievable information, and we definitely appreciate that. Can you just plug your organization real quick? So if anybody wants to follow up and needs an advocate.
Sure. Yeah. I think the last slide has a QR code. But I'm Laurie, and I am advocacy for the special ones in your life. And so I can be found at advocacy for the special ones in your life. And I welcome phone calls or emails at any time to answer any questions. And I also think there are some other really good, agencies out there. And I know not that I'm plugging this, but there are agencies like there's one called City of Support, right? And they do graduation ceremonies for anything. They will clap and have these people walk across stage, and these kids walk across stage for any milestone, for anything. And I think what I encourage is find your people, find your team, find those of us who literally lose sleep trying to problem solve, situations, because I really do believe that there are, people out there, but I also believe it's really hard to find, right? And I believe that it's tough, but network and find your team of people who are just willing to lose sleep over your child, because there are those of us who are willing to. So that's it. You guys have been great.
And so for everybody, we really appreciate it. For everybody who's still here, we're gonna launch a poll, but we'd also like to invite you next month in September. We have Dr. Donnelly coming from Laurie's Children's Hospital in the Chicagoland area, and she will be giving an education on complex chronic conditions, focusing on like a Duchenne's or a Batten's and what that disease progression looks like. So please complete the poll and look forward to seeing you next month.
Good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.